Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 174 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley, and today's episode is on 4 factors that cause friendships to end. And it is the 1st of October 2022 as I record this. And today's episode I thought was a really fun break from what we normally cover on the podcast. Because we all know from social psychology how important friendships are. And there are many mental health benefits, cognitive psychology benefits, and so friendships are really important for all of us. But what happens to them and what causes them to end is actually just important. And personally, something that I quite enjoy about today's episode is that there are actually quite a few sort of unofficial takeaways. I'll put it in the content part of today's episode. I'm going to be telling you about the 4 factors that can cause friendships to end, so you can sort of reverse engineer them in a way, just so you hopefully never actually get to that point where your friendships have to end because of these 4 factors. So there's a lot of great information coming up in the content part. And because by the time this podcast goes out, yes, I'm actually back in my own house and my recording equipment. But the problem is that I won't have enough time to actually do a podcast episode though. But next week I will be back to normal. So you will have the psychology news section and the person update back. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Whiteley, or you can leave a comment on Facebook at Connor Whiteley Psychology Author. And I really do like hearing from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Psychology of Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationship, prosocial behaviour, and more, 4th edition. Because even though I'm sort of re-recording these introductions out of order, but because the introduction from episode 172 I've not actually re-recorded yet. But I really am so excited about this brand new edition of Psychology of Relationships because it's just so good. It really does go into so much more great depth. And it really does explore some absolute brilliant topics. For example, like sexuality, it goes more in friendships or what causes homosexuality, well, the theories at least, and there are just so many more absolute brilliant topics in addition to all of the really popular stuff from last time. For example, the biological, psychological, and the social factors that actually lead to friendship formation, and also communication. In fact, that has a new updated section. And then that brilliant book actually sort of builds on today's episode because there's actually an entire chapter or two but that actually goes on to why relationships change and end. So this is just such a brilliant book that if you're interested in like social psychology and friendship psychology, I suppose you could call it, this is the book that you've absolutely got to have. So that is Psychology of Relationships, the Social Psychology of Friendships, Romantic Relationships and More, 4th edition. Available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. But if you do want to buy a book, you still need to give the podcast a bit like one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. And what you buy in books and buying me coffees allows me to do is that it just sort of helps me to like cover my time in editing, producing, producing, writing and editing and uploading the podcast because it always does take quite a bit of time. So now the introduction's done, let's dive into the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about 4 factors that can cause friendships to end. And I really enjoyed this podcast episode, but you should too. And just as a sort of like an introduction to like today's episode, we all know that as humans we are very social species, and our bonds are very important to all of us. So when these relationships break, we all tend to be upset, confused, and basically though we're just flat out devastated when these people that we have spent time in bonding with and maintaining our relationship with are no longer our friends. But what causes this? And thankfully, there's a great brand new study that helps explain it all. A Posiovta and Karamari, 2021. In order to answer that question, we need to look at a great new study that investigates both the evolutionary psychology and the social psychology behind friendship. First, we need to emphasize the importance of the topic a little more, because this truly does affect everyone, no matter their age, socio-economic status, and where they live. We all prefer to keep bonds rather than break them. This is even more important when we consider just how much the role of friendships play in all of our lives, since it is our friends that provide us with companionship, emotional support, and they are sources of pleasure and joy. Therefore, when our friendships do decay and break down, we lose a lot of great things. That's why it is critical to know why relationships break down in the first place. To investigate this, the study here that I said earlier, because both of those are Greek names and I find them really hard to pronounce, conducted a recent study using 577 over 18-year-olds, and this study ended up concluding 4 factors that lead to why friendships end. And for the sake of research methodology, and to stretch out this episode a little longer, it's important to note that both men and women will be used here, so that the results can be applied to both sexes, and there were no differences between opposite and same-sex friendships, so that the results are fairly generalizable. As well as another good thing about this study is that you can really apply the results to your own life to different extents, so you can possibly understand why you've lost friends in the past, and these episodes might help you to be a better friend moving forward. So, let's look at these 4 factors. Romantic involvement. The researchers found that women were more likely to end friendships if they perceived that their friend was interested in them or their partner romantically, which I understand because it certainly does bring a little more awkwardness to the friendship. Then again, I've been in friendships when I've liked them, and that didn't actually impact the friendship at all, and ended for completely different reasons, which were more to do with other people than me and my friends. Lack of frequent interaction. This is definitely an important factor, and I will have to admit that I am extremely guilty of this, and I would have to say, that this is probably how most of my friendships have ended in the past. But the researchers found that losing touch and having a decreased amount of communication fell under this reason for why friendships end, as well as men, not women, were more likely to say this as a reason for ending a friendship. Selfishness. This reason isn't strictly limited to selfishness per se, because a lack of reciprocity and trust in a friendship fell under this section too, as well as or became unsupportive, unkind or manipulative, then these traits also fell under this reason, amongst others. And I really do recommend that you actually check out the study yourself, references on the blog post, because some of these more details are really interesting. In addition, women were more likely than men to end friendships because of selfishness. Perceptions of friends and family. Now, this is a reason I wholeheartedly support, and this is just an awful reason in my opinion, because of these really can and do ruin friendships. Therefore, the researchers found that both men and women were just as likely as each other to end their friendships if their other friends and family members disapproved of them. And one example of this could be my other friends pointing out the negative effects that these friends have on us. Personally, I completely get that example, and I have done it too. Though I have openly said to friends before that I didn't think that they were a good influence on them, and to be honest, they weren't. Because we all want to protect our friends, so they don't make a decision that they're going to regret or do something stupid, if not a little criminal. And even that example has probably given you an insight in that one of my friendships and their other friends. But equally, sometimes friends and family members can overreact for absolutely no reason and ruin a very healthy and a great friendship. So it is a tough one, and one that I have lots of experience with. Yeah, way too much experience with that one. Lastly, the researchers did find that older people were more likely to end friendships than younger people, with the researchers suggesting that this is because older people tend to already have a well-formed group of friends, so where they're in a better position to sort out and eliminate friendships that aren't serving them well. Limitations of the study. Of course, no study is ever perfect, and I do sort of like looking at this methodology side of life on the podcast from time to time. For example, the study didn't look at the difference in dynamics in the vote in ending opposite versus same-sex friendships. So that's something for future studies to explore. Additionally, it would have been good to know the quality, the strength of the friendships before it was ended, and this would allow us to understand if the newer friendships are easier or harder to end, and if the reasons are different. Finally, and this is like the mini theme of the Psychology World podcast, but this study was conducted in. As a result, it would be interesting to see if this study replicated well in other cultures, in other countries, on other continents. Conclusion. Personally, today's episode was very different from what we normally look at on the podcast, but it's important to do. It is important for all of us to break out of our niches from time to time and explore other areas of our amazing, wonderful, and to be honest, breathtaking profession. And this is even better when we explore a topic that does directly impact our lives and maybe even improves it. Since now what we know as real people, not psychologists, for things not to do, or we do truly risk ruining and breaking our friendships with those we treasure. This is something I think we can all agree, is that is something that we really, really want to avoid. Because we are a social species, and absolutely none of us want to experience the pain of losing our precious social bonds. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you got something out of it. I know that I definitely did, and even though I will not focus on these 4 factors per se, I will definitely make sure they're in the back of my mind, just so I know to make sure I never sort of give other people the excuse to drop me as a friend for these reasons. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Of Our Relationships, the social psychology of friendships, romantic relationships, and more, 4th edition. Available in all the usual places, and if you enjoyed today's episode, then you absolutely have to get that brilliant book. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.